Hello.
Hi, Nora. I'm going to make you co-host so that if you have any slides to share, you can share your screen.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Recording.
So let me see. Yes. Yeah, perfect. Okay. I was racing home from picking up my kids, and there was like traffic one way and some kind of accident the other. And I was like,
No.
panicking. I was like, what am I going to do? So I just have to like settle down.
Okay. Yeah, that's stressful.
Oh man, it was not ideal.
No, it's not, and it always happens at the worst time. Like the one time I got stuck when I was a teacher, the one time I got stuck behind an accident and couldn't get to the building in time was the day of the state test.
Oh my gosh.
Test, and I'm behind this accident on my cell phone with the receptionist at the school saying, I'm on my way.
Oh,
big accident. And I'm getting there as fast as I can.
Yeah, it's so frustrating when there's like nothing you can do. Like, oh my gosh, I was like shaking. I was like, what if I don't make it? Okay, I have to like recenter. Oh, here's somebody somebody just chatted the same thing. Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, yeah, my kids, it's like a 12-minute drive. But Friday afternoon, sometimes it can just be an hour. And then if there's an accident on top of that, it's, oh my gosh. Yeah. I love audiobooks. Oh my gosh. Brian's chatting here. Should I turn off my video during the first session?
You can. That would be fine.
Okay.
Okay, and then Stephanie, I'm going to make you co-host as well.
Hey, Stephanie.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Hi, and this is your screen.
Okay. I'm super interested in your presentation.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Oh, I hope so.
They've all been good. I love conferences, and these presentations have been really good. So it's been fun.
Hi, Nora. Hi, Stephanie. I'm Danny. I'm going to be your chair today.
Oh, hi, Danny.
Hello.
Oh, I love your bookshelf. Look at all the good books.
I have yours as well.
Oh, you do? Oh. Hey.
Do you have it color coded? Are you like doing the rainbow thing?
Yes. So yes, it is. But then there are also like clumps of books that just haven't, I pulled them out to talk about and just haven't put them back, or yeah, they're just kind of out there.
Basically, I'll just let people know when we start that they're being recorded, and you'll each have time to introduce yourselves, and then I think it's Stephanie, you're first on my list, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Nora, so I'll give you guys, I don't know, what's going to be easiest for you in terms of timekeeping? Would you rather me put like a note in the chat or like wave frantically at you? Like what's going to work for you?
You can put a note in the chat for me, and then if I, for some reason, don't see it, you can just interrupt me. But I think I've got it pretty good.
A note in the chat would be great. I have a timer, so hopefully.
Yeah, I do too. I'm like, really? I'm like, you can't go over 20 minutes.
No.
I'm right about 19, hopefully. Stephanie, do you have any pets at your house?
I do. I have 3 dogs.
Oh,
I have one of my dog who has severe separation anxiety is right on the floor next to me. She's not a lap dog. She's like a border collie, so can't fit in the lap on the chair.
Right.
And then we have 2 smaller ones who are just rescues from the shelter, the Austin shelter in Texas, and then one here in Dallas is where we got them from. So
awesome. Nice. I have a shelter dog too. He's little.
they're
A
the
little
best.
guy, but he's old. Oh, I know. They're such the best. I'm just like, he's usually always so quiet. And so I'm just okay. You're gonna be quiet during the 20 minutes I need to talk.
One of ours is a beagle mix, so I'm like, okay, just 20 minutes, just 20 minutes.
Right. And I'm also, there's a lot of kids in this neighborhood that just kind of like run around. And I'm also like, oh, is someone gonna ring the doorbell? Like all these things. It's a whole interesting virtual presentation world.
Yes, agreed. Very much so.
Hi, everyone.
Now we'll get started here in just a minute. All right, so it is officially time. So we'll go ahead and get started. We've got 2 presentations in this room. Stephanie Branson is going to speak to us about reconciling YA and the classics. And then Nora, is it Shalloway?
That's right.
Carpenter?
Good job. Mhm.
Is going to talk to us about reframing, write what you know to increase student engagement and empathy. Just so everyone knows, the session is being recorded. Each presenter has about 20 minutes and we'll do questions at the end. So Stephanie, you want to take it away?
I do, thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen so I can set up my presentation. Oh, what's going on? I'm so sorry. Click the wrong button. There we go. Okay, so my presentation is Reconciling YA in the Classics, the Responsibilities of Layering Racial Literacy as White Teachers in the Secondary Classroom. I'm white, so I'm talking on what I know. So my context for this presentation is I am a white educator. I work at the district level of a pretty diverse student body in the DFW area. However, our teacher body, who we employ for teachers, is hardly diverse at all. So a majority of us are white women, some white men, and then a smattering of other culturally representative teachers in the district. So this is something that we're really trying to push to our teachers and open their eyes and get them to think about their literacy, English language arts, English composition curriculum in a new way. So I want to open my presentation first by just having my DFW land acknowledgement. I would like to open my session today by acknowledging that the land from which I present is the occupied, unceded, seized territory of the Wichita and Caddo affiliated tribes. These tribes have stewarded this land throughout the generations, and we would like to pay our respects to elders, both past and present. And I did get this and amend it from our local university, the University of North Texas. So that's where that came from. So my focus on this presentation today is really to explain how my personal research is moving forward with racial literacy and how I'm trying to impact my teachers in my school district in this way as well. One of the things that is really brought to light in our school district specifically is that we as white teachers must shoulder the responsibility for talking about race and racism, interrupting the racism that we see occurring within literature, within our curriculum, within our society and history, and not taking, not relying on our colleagues of color to take the lead in this work. I think a lot of the times in the past, we have, as white teachers, tried to say, that's not mine to talk on. I don't know much about that, but I do know teacher so-and-so, she has a lot more to say about this, or I'm having a problem with this kid group. Why don't you go talk to Miss so-and-so, and I think she can help you out. So really trying to have us as white teachers shoulder that responsibility more and be more proactive and advocates for racial literacy within our classrooms. We must reframe pedagogy, and I really love how Goldie Mohammed said this. White teachers must reframe pedagogy and literacy as a necessary tool for students of color for self-empowerment, self-determination, and self-liberation. And it's really critical that the curriculum choices that we're putting in front of, on my level, the curriculum that we're putting in front of the teachers and that they're enacting with their students are allowing all students to have this self-advocacy and that they're seeing themselves within the space and not othered outside of the space. So a couple of key terms that I want to go over really quickly are racial literacy. So when I'm talking about racial literacy, I mean the ability to have the knowledge, skills, awareness, and disposition to talk about race and racism. In this context, specifically how it relates to literature, literacy curriculum, and within the ELAR classroom around discussions and writing and those specific content practices. Colorblindness is a mindset that refuses to acknowledge racial differences, and that if we ignore race altogether, then racial disadvantages would cease and all would be fixed in the world. Colorblindness does deny identity, and it invalidates a person's experience with racism and oppression. Stock stories is something that we see pretty often within our given curriculum, and that is just the repetition and retelling of the same thing over and over and over in order to position it as the dominant story and ideal within society. For example, we, especially recently with the critical race theory conversation that's going on right now, we like to say that, well, the civil rights movement, it's over, it's completed. We triumphed over that racism and we found victory and equality. And with that being the stock story that, completely is told over and over and over, that's what becomes dominant in a lot of our minds. One of the things I really am going to focus on today as I'm talking about a couple of texts is the white savior narrative. So this is a trope that conveys people and communities of color need saving by a white dominant heroic character in order to make white readers and audiences feel comfortable with our racial selves and position characters of color as secondary and needing help from whiteness. And then finally, my last key term is going to be counter stories. And this is stories that challenge dominant narratives about mainstream ideals in our society, such as the American dream, or as I know a lot of us literature teachers have used in the past and like to talk about the universal human experience that we all, experience together. So with all that being said, when we're talking about racial literacy, we need to realize that all of the literature we use in our classroom doesn't just expose and reflect race and racism in our society. Literature that we've been studying since the beginning, including our classical and canonical texts, have been within our society and imprinted and constructed our total view of race and racism. And all literature, no matter what we think, is racialized in some way, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. So if we are looking at books like Gatsby, which is pretty much a predominant white book, and it's one of those books that's canon, and we see it come up over and over and over again, and we don't see this as a racial book most of the time, because this is just a white dominant, nothing is quote unquote different about it, but it is also racialized in itself, because we are talking about centering whiteness. So what does centering whiteness in the 20s in New York City, what are we saying about that? What is our kids, what are they internalizing because of that book? And if we're not talking about Tom Buchanan's rant on the Black community and Jordan Baker's line about don't worry, we're all white here, then we're not really teaching this book. We're just perpetuating racism in itself and just glossing over the things that are really critically important for our kids' racial literacy. And then finally, the literature that we place in front of students truly matters and shows what we value. If we are only putting canon in front of our kids, written by white males, taking a white dominant perspective, we are saying to our classes, to our students, to our peers, and then me to my teachers, I'm telling you what I value. So if I'm giving you Gatsby, To Kill a Mockingbird, The Giver, etc., I'm showing that I value the white dominant narrative, and I have no place for other voices within my curriculum, within my lesson planning, and the students that we have of diverse cultures and backgrounds will feel marginalized, pushed to the margins, voices quieted, and not empowered whatsoever. So just being really thoughtful about what we're putting in front of our kiddos, and also being really cognizant of the choices that we're making so that we are honoring everybody within our classroom and not perpetuating the status quo of internalized systemic racism moving forward. So a couple of questions that come up when I'm working with my English teachers in my district is race and racism an appropriate subject for the English classroom? I say, I mean, absolutely, right? That is obviously my position in this presentation, but we cannot talk about literature without recognizing that race and racism play a huge role in that literature. We can't talk about To Kill a Mockingbird. We can't talk about Great Gatsby. We can't talk about Huck Finn without mentioning race and racism, and not just, oh, this book, this is a little bit racist, what Tom says, we're going to move forward from that. It's just, it doesn't work for our kiddos. It perpetuates that status quo, and it doesn't get our kids to have the skills to be able to combat race and racism in their futures. Is it enough that I teach texts by and about people of color? No, it's not enough that we just incorporate these kind of books in our classroom. We're exposing our kids to those books, and that's a great first step. But if all we're doing is putting those books in front of the kids and talking about craft choices and words without talking about the author behind it or the characters and how the characters act a certain way or choices that they make because of our background, then we're not doing enough to get some real meaningful work out of these books. We're just relying on exposure, and we're sticking to the status quo because that's what we're comfortable with. And then does focusing on race and racism take away from the actual literature instruction in the English classroom? knowing and thinking about and analyzing the role of race and racism within all of the lit we put in front of our kids deepens their understanding of the actual literature instruction elements and devices that are occurring, right? So if we are really digging into character, but not talking about race and racism, then we're not actually getting that full understanding of that character and why they are motivated and why they act the way they do. So focusing on this race and racism take does actually deepen our understanding with these complex texts and allows our kiddos to grapple with more and make deeper, more meaningful, more authentic understandings so that they're able to take and transfer that racial literature and racial literacy skills to other content texts after they, once they become adults and are functioning in our society with voices and advocacy and, really just action that we're hoping that they take. So the second half of this presentation, I just want to highlight some books that you might want to think about in pairing with some of our classic novels that only have the singular white dominant perspective. I know our district is kind of lucky that our given curriculum is really broad. So we give them, because I'm on the curriculum development team, we give them kind of artiques bundled out into ways that make sense for they might want to teach them, but we do not have required texts. We do not have texture skills or any of these things that our teachers have to do to be in our school district for the literacy experience. So a couple of these books that you might want to think about pairing, you might want to think about substituting or pulling excerpts if you do have a given curriculum that's very rigid. So these are kind of my middle level books. So Harbour Me by Jacqueline Woodson, beautiful text, super short. If you haven't read it, it's just really fantastic. It is about this small group of kiddos in New York City who have differences in some way. We have really poignant conversations on immigration and immigration status and what it means to be disabled versus able-bodied and what race starts to look like when you're in a 5th or 6th grade level. Front Desk is also very fantastic. It's one that we actually just put into our curriculum as a highlight, like we would love for you in 6th grade to do this book. And this is about Mia, who is a Chinese immigrant, and she and her family just came over to the United States, and they're working for this hotel manager running this hotel on their own. Mia grapples with some friend relationships because she is an immigrant and most people around her are not. And she also grapples with some discrimination and some prejudice situations that really illuminate the story for her, the plot, and the character. And then Towers Falling is fabulous. I love Jewel Parker Rhodes, especially for middle level kiddos. And this is, it centers on the 9/11 attacks to the Twin Towers, but this occurs 14 years later. So all of the kids centering around this story were not alive when it happened, but they're still dealing with the impacts of that today. And they're really kind of exploring why this would happen, why we have, some mindsets that are anti-Muslim, etc. So this set of books, I'm really excited that we heard Eric Gansworth in the last session. This set of books is really focusing on this idea of coming of age and identity and our person story, right? How a kid or a kiddo or a character moves forward to discover something about themselves. And so If I Ever Get Out of Here is a really wonderful book by Eric Gansworth. It takes place a kid who left his Indian reservation to join a new white dominant high school and the stuff that he grapples with through that. And then you have Between the Lines, which is an older Nikki Grimes book, but it is centering around this class in this English composition class where they're all working towards writing a spoken word poem to present in a poetry slam. And you get each character's perspective through each chapter, and you hear something completely different from each person. And then Game Changer is a really great book that kind of shakes up the status quo on sports books. There's a lot of commentary on concussions and hazing and team dynamics in relation to race and prejudice and stuff that happens when kids don't know those dynamics very well. And this one ties up really nicely in a bow. But if you have kids who are really sports football heavy, this might be one you think about instead. Okay, and so my next set of books really centers around dystopia. I know in my schooling, we read a ton of dystopian fiction, Ender's Game and The Giver being two that I really remember very well. All of these, for the most part, are either white implied or white dominant, but there are two really fantastic newer books that you could pair really well with Excerpt to Excerpt, or you could substitute. The first one being the book, my favorite read last year was The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Demeline. She is a member of the Métis tribe of the Métis Nation in Canada. And this is a dystopian novel that focuses on after global warming happens, all hell breaks loose on the earth, and the indigenous community are the only ones that are able to have dreams. So they're being hunted for their bone marrow, and it's really this survival story about the main character who gets to know himself and his identity and why there are such struggles between races. And then Nixia is also a really great dystopian book. It has a very diverse cast of characters who are all struggling with their identities and with each other to be able to choose fortune or to make humanity better. So it's very much that space Ender's Game type book, but it takes a lot of different character interactions and perspectives that Enders might not have, as deep with. And then this last set kind of focused on those heavy hitter books that really, I think, we see across the United States as books that are constantly being taught still in classrooms. I know To Kill a Mockingbird is that, the second highest taught book, I think, in our whole nation. And, it focuses on that white savior narrative of Atticus. And here are a couple different options that you might use instead of these canonical texts that hit the same goals. So Sing Unburied Sing, I believe, won the National Book Award in 2019, and it centers around Jojo and his family dynamics in rural Mississippi. The book really focuses on the plot point of his mom and him and his little sister being thrust into a car to pick up his mom's boyfriend, I guess, from prison. And just like you might see in a book like The Watsons Go to Birmingham, etc., that car ride to that end place really is horrible. And then it turns to some hope. And it really just shows Jojo coming to age and really understanding himself and his background and his culture differently than he thought before. Homegoing is also one of my top books that I've read this year. I think this book is a really great option when talking about a book that centers around the American dream, because the second half of the book really digs in what the American dream means for white people versus what the American dream means for everybody else. And the American dream is this idealistic thing that most people do not ever actually get to experience. And so this dual narrative that runs through time with Homegoing is a really exceptional way to tell the story, to really tell the counter story of what it means to come to America and be American. And then Just Mercy is one of my favorite books to pair with To Kill a Mockingbird. It is what you could say is the true story that occurs with Atticus and Tom in To Kill a Mockingbird, but it is not based on this white savior, somebody has to come and save him narrative. It is narrative nonfiction. It's something that actually happened, and it's something that is more relevant to our kiddos in our lives now than To Kill a Mockingbird would have been.
Stephanie, I'm going to let you know your time is up.
Oh, okay. Yes. And then here's some resources. But I'm going to drop this in the, sorry, my chat did not show up very well. but I'm going to drop this in the PowerPoint in the chat so you guys have that.
All right, and I should have said at the beginning, folks, if anybody has any questions for either of our speakers, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll collect them and can ask them at the end, or if we have questions at the end, we can do that too. All right, Nora.
I just jump in, right? I see some cute babies. Oh my goodness, everyone's holding their cute babies. Okay. Let's see. Hopefully I can share my screen here. All right. Can everyone see? Yeah? You guys can see it? Okay, cool. All right, so hi, my name is Nora Shalaway Carpenter. I'm the author of the YA novel, The Edge of Anything, and the contributing editor of the YA anthology, Rural Voices, 15 Authors Challenge Assumptions About Small Town America. Both of those came out in 2020. Welcome to my presentation, Reframing Write What You Know to Increase Student Engagement and Empathy. And I just want to take a quick second to thank all of you teachers for what you do. I have 3 young children, and the energy that you give to your classes is incredible. So you're awesome. Thank you. Okay, so one of my favorite quotes about language comes from Rita Mae Brown. Language exerts hidden power like the moon on the tides. I think it's safe to say that most language arts teachers understand this fundamental idea, and that's why they're so passionate about helping their students learn to write. Too often, though, traditional writing models inadvertently disempower and disengage students, particularly those from low socioeconomic backgrounds. The instructor's own language exerts extraordinary power, and if we want creative writing to be accessible and empowering to all students, we must wield that power with extreme care. This session will demonstrate how a seemingly minor tweak on a traditional adage, so changing the guidance, write what you know, to write what you know emotionally, can fundamentally change students' relationship to writing. If we encourage students to write what they know emotionally, we will create more inspired and more open-minded writers and thinkers. So I'm going to present a series of exercises that will heighten students' enjoyment of writing by personalizing the experience and empowering students as experts, connect students to characters and each other through universal human emotions, and deepen student empathy, thereby promoting anti-bias and anti-racist thinking. So I want to begin with an anecdote, and I've loved story making for as long as I can remember, and that's the earliest picture I could find of me with a book. I think I was like 4 or 5. But when I was growing up in rural West Virginia in a poverty-stricken area, I heard the same piece of advice over and over from teachers, advice that is still repeated ad nauseum today. Write what you know. And this advice does have its place if it's explained correctly, and it especially works well for adults. But I'd like you to consider what a young person feels like they know, particularly if their family doesn't have a lot of money or access to opportunities that middle and upper class students have. So in my own case, I knew about my school experience, homework, my specific family dynamics, sports, and extracurriculars. Some of my peers, however, belonged to families who never traveled more than an hour or so from their homes and couldn't afford to participate in any extracurriculars at all, sometimes just due to lack of transportation. So first, we have the basic lack of experience opportunities that affect students from low-income families, and that's bumping up against this write what you know. And on top of that is an internalized knowing that many of these students feel because of their backgrounds as well. So in my own case, like many rural teens and people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, I had internalized popular media's insinuation that I was less worthy than people from urban or wealthier places. Write what you know was the opposite of helpful for me, because I came to believe society's message that stories about where I lived and people who lived there didn't matter. No one wanted to hear them and no one cared. Really, they just made fun of us. I also quickly realized that I received much more respect when I hid my background. Now consider what I actively did want to write about. I loved fantasy. I loved adventure stories of far off places and travel, stories that took me far away from the isolated, ridiculed, and low socioeconomic lifestyle in which I grew up. Essentially, I wanted to write about everything I didn't know, but I was repeatedly told that that was wrong, or that I could be a better writer if I really focused on what I knew, my own experience. So over and over again, I was told to write what I know. So what happened? I quit. I was a student who actively sought out writing classes, writing camps, and who wrote for fun. I won awards for it, but I was always kind of writing the same thing because that's what teachers were wanting, kind of this this idea that they had of this West Virginia experience. And the more I was told to write that, instead of what brought me joy, the more I believed I wasn't doing it correctly, or that the correct way was not fun, and so I just didn't want to do it. And I tell you this anecdote because it is not unique. And I'm sure many of your students have felt this too. This pressure to write in a way that doesn't feel real or exciting to them. And I bet your students of color, constantly surrounded by implications that a white patriarchal voice is the best kind of writing voice, feel it even more. So let's switch it up. Let's teach students how to write stories that matter to them. And no matter what their genre, from sci-fi to fantasy to contemporary, that resonate with readers no matter how different those readers are from the characters. And let's do that by teaching them to write what they know emotionally. So at this point, you might be thinking, are you talking about having them do diary entries here? Because my students just aren't going to write about their emotions. Some of them keep them well hidden on purpose. And let me assure you, we're definitely not talking about diaries. And you're exactly right that students probably wouldn't be engaged in any kind of assignment that was merely, okay, let's just write about what you're feeling. That wouldn't work well for anyone unless it was, set up very well. So we come at this teaching at a bit of a slant, using a series of exercises that prep students to engage emotionally without them really knowing it at first. So in her article, What Do Students Mean When They Say I Hate Writing? Linda A. Holmes explains, students can develop the motivation to write well and become engaged with our writing assignments when they actively participate with their writing educators in guided interactions tailored to their unique context. With this personal relevance in mind, I always start my writing workshops with the same prompt, and I encourage you to try it as well. Offer your students 3 to 5 minutes to free write about the last story that they truly fell in love with, one that they couldn't stop thinking about. Ensure students that they don't need to worry about grammar or sentences. This is just a free write, but do encourage them to be specific as possible. If they loved a character, why did they like that character? Did they like, all the parts of the character? Did they especially like the parts of the character that pushed up against societal norms? Be really specific. It's also very important to let them use TV or other media forms, anything that has a story that engages them. Now we have limited time here, so I'm not going to have you do this right now, but I would encourage you to also do this prompt to see how it works and the feelings that it inspires before using it with your students. It just makes it more powerful. So after 5 minutes, have the students share their answers. And here are some responses I've received, and you'll probably get some similar ones. So I love X, Y, and Z story because I enjoy the romance. I like to be scared. The characters remind me of myself or my family. The writing makes me laugh. It gets me out of my head. It makes me feel better about my own life. It makes me feel less alone, or it takes me somewhere. Now, this is very important. Make sure you validate everyone's answers. I personally don't really love horror stories, but one of my best writing friends is an amazing horror author. That's what gets him excited about writing. And if that's what gets your student excited, that's the kind of writing they should start with. So why do we do this? Why not start a creative writing unit the way so many traditional ones do, with reading a published short story, for example, probably a famous one, and then learning more about that particular genre and asking students to create a similar piece? Well, the best way to start enjoying writing is to write for the reasons you like to read or watch, and write the kind of stories you like to read and watch. So students are going to be working on different types of stories according to their personal tastes. And this one exercise gives them a concrete list of story characteristics that keeps them engaged. This exercise allows students to tap into that I can't get enough feeling they have when they read or watch a series that they really love. We're going to help them find it when they write. Also, by having students share their favorites aloud, you can begin creating a class text list, one that will no doubt be as diverse as your students. You can then recommend other texts or spoken poetry or TV shows based on the students' interests, which is going to make them way more interested in what you have to share. It also builds connections among the students that might not have been there before. Oh, you like that series? So do I. Have you tried these books or this series? Do you know this comedian? Have you read this graphic novel, etc.? So this exercise may seem small, but it actually does a lot of heavy lifting. After students have shared their favorite books or shows, ask them to pull their very favorite characteristics from that list. And every list is going to be different. So some examples. One student might love fantasy genres with, they might really like the romantic tension. They might love protagonists that aren't book smart, but are smart in other ways. Another student might really love thrillers. They might prefer differently able protagonists. Maybe they're super book smart. And yet another student might enjoy contemporary, quieter stories, or maybe a grief narrative. Maybe they don't want any romance at all in their book and that would turn them off. So as you can see, suddenly students already know some very important details about the story they're going to write. And this personalization is essential. If we ask a student who enjoys snarky, pun-filled thrillers to write a contemporary friendship narrative, we're going to lose their engagement, and vice versa. And yes, students should have to write different kinds of stories, but not at first. At first, we have to hook them, just like a great story does to a reader. But how is this making students more empathetic and more anti-bias? Don't worry, the first prompt laid the groundwork. The next prompt explores universal human emotions, and that's where things get really wonderful. If you've studied writing in depth, as many of you have, you probably know that the best stories have protagonists with both an external desire, a goal they are actively reaching for, so be it saving the world or finding a friend, and an internal desire. And that is an internal emotional goal that the character probably isn't even aware of, but that is nonetheless fundamental in forwarding the plot. Yet time and again, I see students who prioritize the character's external goal over the internal, or who don't fully understand their character's internal goal. When we teach students to flip that, we help them truly connect to their stories and their readers, i.e. each other. As Lisa Cron explains in her excellent craft book, Story Genius, the events of a story by themselves mean nothing. It's what those events mean to us that has us compulsively turning pages. In other words, we don't really care about a character's story unless we care about the character. And we care about the character because we identify with their internal desire. Here's where we can teach students to write what they know emotionally, because students may not know what it feels like to travel through outer space, or practice magic, or even fall in love. But they do know what it's like to yearn for belonging and acceptance, to yearn for respect, to yearn for safety, or to matter in the world. So you can write any kind of story and still connect to readers through these personal desires. So my list of universal human longings is not comprehensive, so feel free to have your students brainstorm more, but do discuss it as a class. Then you can move on to another free write in which you ask students to identify the protagonist's internal desire in their favorite book or show. This can be difficult sometimes, especially if it's the first time students are learning about internal desire. So it's important to discuss as a group. And I often give examples from a popular series, as you can see here. A great class exercise would be to choose a TV show or book that everyone is familiar with, maybe something you've just read in class, and pinpoint the protagonist's internal desire together. After students have a good grasp on what internal desires are, the next step is for them to identify one that they are most interested at this moment. That should be the one that they explore in their story. So at this point, even if they had no idea what they were going to write about at first, after just a few prompts, students already know 3 huge things about their story: the genre, the basic type of the protagonist, and the protagonist's internal desire, which is going to create the plot. More importantly, students begin to see that no matter how different characters appear to be at first, whether by race, socioeconomic background, street versus book smart, shy versus outgoing, gender identity, etc., they still share the same internal universal desires. So you can have an outgoing Black character who explores the galaxy in a sci-fi story and a shy white character who never wants to move from his hometown in a contemporary story. They might both dream of mattering and making a positive mark on their communities. A gay Latinx character and a cis Korean American character might both yearn for acceptance in their new environments. And the readers of these stories, the students, no matter how they identify, they can connect with any of these stories because they have all felt these same intense human longings. And that is key. These universal longings span across culture, race, gender, ethnicity, sexuality, every identity barrier that you can think of. And when students see parts of themselves in characters who outwardly appear completely different from them, that's when anti-bias and anti-racist thinking can begin to occur. The other beautiful result that occurs from teaching students to write what they know emotionally is that it positions the student always and immediately as the expert. As human beings, students know just as much about these universal human desires as any adult or published author. And that confidence matters. Consider what Gloria Anzaldúa says about confidence. The voice recurs in me. Who am I, a poor chicanita from the sticks, to think I could write? How hard it is for us to think we can choose to become writers, much less feel and believe that we can. Many of your students are going to feel that too. Who am I to write? I'm poor. My family doesn't even like books. Why should I write? Or who am I to write? I don't sound like F. Scott Fitzgerald or Virginia Woolf. Side note, they don't have to, and they shouldn't. Or who am I to write? I don't know what to write about, and I don't know how to write correctly. That creativity killer word, correctly, how writers hate it. As Felicia Rose Chavez explains over and over in her incredible book, The Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, and if you guys haven't read it, you have to read it right away. It just came out in January. Teachers must develop students' confidence in order for them to truly connect to their writing. She tells us, empower participants to do it wrong before they do it right. Such an approach to the writing workshop teaches the twin goals of creativity and courage. Creative writing is more about harnessing energy, the heart of an idea, than it is about imposing sterilized order or the right way to communicate. It took me until graduate school to learn those things, and oh man, I wish I had known that sooner. So the exercise that I'm presenting directly address these common student insecurities. They've figured out what kind of story and protagonist interest them. They've chosen their character's internal desire. We are all creative beings. We all have the ability to write if we are only given the permission and the freedom to write stories that engage and inspire us personally. Here are some more exercises that you can build on. To give your protagonist shape, have students free write the answers to these questions. What does your protagonist look like? How do they feel about themselves? Who, if any, are their friends? What do they do for fun? Where do they live? To whom do they confide their biggest secret? What is their biggest secret? Remind students, you are not your character, but you can use your real emotions to bring that character to life. Those emotions will connect with readers and create empathy for your character. To help students develop conflict and plot based on their character's internal desire, have them identify and free write about the thing that could most get in the way of that desire. So, for example, a character who yearns for connection or friendship, maybe something happens that gives them a terrible nickname or makes them an outcast, and so no one wants to be associated with them. Okay, so it's like the opposite of what they want. So, spoiler, whatever gets in their way the most, that's the thing that needs to happen in the story so the character can grow. As Chavez explains so succinctly, a writer trusts that they are worthy of words on the page, despite the voices that say otherwise. This is creative power. Help them claim it. By encouraging students to write what they know emotionally, we can do just that. We show them that they are experts and their words are worthy. We can give them the tools to create protagonists that readers of any identity can connect and empathize with, because we all have these universal human longings. And that connection is where anti-biased and anti-racist thinking begins to break down as empathy and identification takes place. That is also creative power, hidden until we study it, like the moon's power among the tides. I hope these exercises and examples help you help your students to not only embrace that power, but to enjoy doing so. I would love to hear any feedback you have, or if you just want to like talk more. So feel free to connect with me at noracarpenterwrites@gmail.com or on my socials. And thank you so much for your time.
Perfect timing. You were right on the money with that.
Yay.
There is a request in the chat if you would be willing to share the presentation.
Oh, how do I do that? If it's just on, yes, can I do that later?
PowerPoint?
What's that?
Is it a PowerPoint?
It is, yes.
If you throw it in a Google Drive, it'll convert it and then you can share the link.
Okay, I can do that. I'll do it right after, yes.
All right, so we've got about 8 minutes here for questions. If anybody would like to ask questions of Stephanie or of Nora.
I just want to say that both these presentations were fantastic and I learned a lot from both of them. So I just wanted to say that to both of you.
Thank you, Michelle. That was so nice.
So much, Michelle.
I'm like reading through the chat because mine didn't show up either. Maybe when you're sharing, it doesn't. That's so interesting.
Everyone's book lists have gotten bigger thanks to you too.
I've added at least like 15 books onto my list from all my sessions that I've seen.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay. I'll see if I can.
In the chat, Jay Bryce asks that Story Genius sounds like a great resource. Can you tell us a little bit more about that book?
Yeah, totally. So it's story, you can see it's like, I use it a lot. Story Genius, how to use brain science to go beyond outlining and write a riveting novel. And it's just excellent. So the first half, I think, is really the most, for me, it's the best part because it talks about, like, she actually uses like brain science, just like she said, to show why stories matter and what parts of the story we hook into. And so you can, you know, when you figure that out, you can be like, oh, okay, so that's what I need to highlight in my work. And she has a writing friend that she's like, okay, will you kind of do my method and do these exercises? And the writing friend is like, sure. So they kind of like create this novel step by step as they go. And it's really excellent because you can see how she's like, oh no, you're not going deeper here. And so then she has to revise like this one section. And it's just, and then the second half of it is really like dig in deep prompts about like, okay, you're ready to write your story. Actually, no, here you need to write like 3 scenes of backstory first before you even write the very beginning. So it's just, I can't recommend it enough. Like I tell everyone to read it, like if they're thinking about writing a novel. And it came out a couple years ago. Yeah, 2016.
Stephanie, I have a question for you since you're in Texas and so am I.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, because you have a lot of freedom in your district, and I know that not all the districts in Texas do, but we also have some legislation that's coming down that's about not talking about race in classrooms. So how are you planning to continue to engage in this work with those challenges?
So to be completely honest, this is something, so my boss is our secondary ELAR coordinator for the whole district. And to be honest, despite legislation, we are still going to be talking about it. I know our school district is very anti the words critical race theory just because they don't understand what it is, and they've read all of the CRT, quips and tweets, so they think it's something it's not. But we feel like there is no way to teach literature if you're not teaching race alongside of it. So we're continuing to kind of keep on the same path that we're going. I think we'll have to be at some crossroads in the future when possibly we do have a fairly high rate of number of conservative households in our district as well. Because I'm in like the Flower Mound, Lewisville area, if that helps with your Texas reference at all. But we're pretty much just going to stay the course until we're told not to. And if I'm personally told not to, I'll go somewhere else. So.
Thank you so much. We still got about 3 minutes. Any other questions or comments from folks?
Yeah, and I think the language that you're using around the books in your classroom too can help you fit in conversations about race without necessarily naming it. I'm thinking of districts around ours who are a lot more conservative politically, and using language that's not as buzzword or controversial, but still talking about the perspectives and who's in the margins and who's illuminating and whose story are we not hearing. I think shifting language a little bit could help that issue, but I don't know how half of our courses, history, ELA, et cetera, are going to be taught without using the word race. So.
Yeah, I don't think you can. Nora, wondering if you were able to get a link for the presentation.
Doing that right now. Sorry.
Okay.
I think I got it. So the only thing is, I don't know what just happened. The only thing is a couple of the fonts are a little different. So sorry about that. So a couple words overlap, but I mean, you can still, it shouldn't be a problem, but you can let me know if it is. I'm trying to get back to where I can see you guys in the chat. Okay, let's see if this works. Does that work?
Let me click on it and we'll see. It says access denied, so you'll either have to grant access to everybody who requests it, or you need to change the access so that anybody with the link can view it.
OMG. Okay. Okay.
This is the story of COVID, right? With everybody doing everything online.
Oh my gosh.
And if our students learned nothing else, they learned how to share documents, right?
That's really funny, actually, Sandra.
Wait a minute.
I would have settled for my department chair figuring out how to turn on the audio, because it was an entire year of trying to figure out how to unmute. That was super funny.
Okay.
You got it?
think. I'm sorry. I didn't know you were gonna have to share.
Oh yeah,
Just
it's
really
there.
everyone wants it.
All right. All right, we're gonna try this one. Does that work?
I'm looking at it right now, Nora, so it definitely works.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh. Thanks for coming, everyone.
I love the conversation in the chat too, about joy and illuminating just people living. Thank you for bringing that up. It was in my mind. I meant to say it, but 20 minutes is so short.
Well, I was really excited that you talked about canon works because I had like a section about that. And then I was like, I can't, it just won't fit. So it was like, oh, that's great. That was taken care of.
All right, I have to close this so that I can reopen it for the next session. So if you are here for the 2:30 session, I do need to end the meeting. I will open it back up again in just a moment, and then we'll get set for the next session. So.
Thank you, everyone.